Hello, hello. Hopefully you're opening this video because you've got a polished draft of a piece of academic expository prose you'd like to correct and rework. That'll be our topic for the video, revision. If you haven't got something specific to revise, hopefully what we'll discuss will be of value in the composition process. This video has 3 parts. First, I'll make a note on revision in general. Then we'll visit 2 strategies for the revision process I find particularly vital. Then, finally, I'll give 2 examples of questions you can ask of your own work as revision exercises. These exercises will not ask you to read through your entire paper again, although doing this can be helpful. The exercises rather ask you to look at elements of your paper in isolation and judge how well they serve their purpose within the model of rhetoric we've discussed before. Here, let's take a moment to look at the revision process in general. Revision means to look at something again. I'm not sitting here with an etymological dictionary, so let's just go with that. Revision is about looking on your work with new eyes, specifically the eyes of a reader. So you're a reader as well as a writer of your own work. Before we talk about cultivating these 2 kinds of critical sensibilities in yourself, I'll give the caveat that the easiest way to get a fresh pair of eyes is to ask for a fresh pair of eyes from someone else. Give your work to another person, a tutor, a colleague, a friend. Another perspective can be vital, and a good humanities or social sciences class will ask you in some way to be a reader of the work of others and to get some feedback on your own. However, it's also your responsibility as an editor of your own work to develop the ability to read your own writing from a distance. The easiest tip for this I have is to just let the work breathe. If at all possible, finish your paper a day or so early so that you can have time to read it again. The more time, the better. The more time passes, the more you forget what you were trying to say. And that is a very good thing, because your readers don't know what you were trying to say. They only have what's written on the page.
First, let's revisit how I talk about writing. For academic writing, I work within a model of a strong, if a little bit rigid, structure. And this is it, the Maya Pyramid of the Magician in Uxmal. Let me know if you've ever actually seen it. Maybe I will someday once travel is possible. So, in other words, maybe never. The reason I use this structure is the 3 layers. We've been working with a structured writing process in which we start with the foundation, which is the evidence, and then build on it by reasoning or analysis, that's the second tier, where we are supported, and finally we set the top where we're making claims on the basis of our analysis. I call it the rhetorical pyramid because the pyramid is all about supporting that top layer, which is the rhetoric proper, that is, the actual claims and the arguments. The question of whether a rhetorical pyramid is sound or not depends on whether the rhetoric is well-founded and well-supported. So, let's get into some new material. What do you do with the paper once you're done? So, let's continue with the metaphor a little bit. Let's pretend we're not just building a pyramid, but we're also going to be taking a step back and looking at how it all holds together. Now, I'm not sure whether the ancient Maya had architecture critics, but let's pretend that that's what we are. Like the Maya and other ancient cultures, we ought to build with a sense of proportion and alignment. They built in such a way that each part of the structure aligns with and is proportionate to the other parts of the structure. Alignment and proportion are going to be the 2 main metaphors of the revision process today. The first thing we'll look at is proportion. A proportional argument is one in which the evidence, reasons, and claims are all rationally ordered. So by rational, I do not mean that you need a certain amount of text for each, that is to fit a certain ratio, but I mean that nothing should exceed what it should be doing. We don't want a bottom-heavy argument with evidence that's not built upon, or a top-heavy argument with unsupported analysis or claims. Bottom-heavy arguments are often characterized by not too much evidence, but evidence that you just don't develop. An example is when you feel like you need a quote, but it's late and you're tired, so you just choose a quote from your notes, but you don't really tell us what the significance of the quote is or what it really means. Sometimes people will just choose quotes that summarize what happens in the text, and because our papers aren't about summarizing what happens, there's not really that much going on here within them in the analysis that's going to support the argument ultimately. A bottom-heavy argument is also one where there's analysis that's not built upon or not included in the introduction or main claim. A top-heavy argument, by contrast, is one with too broad a main claim, one that's not refined enough to really fit with the analysis. Top-heavy arguments are made by big claims that aren't directly and fully supported by analysis, and top-heavy analysis is when you don't fully explain yourself or go further than the evidence merits on the face of it. For example, I saw a lot of papers last time that argued that the authors of our texts have particular moral attitudes toward the actions or narratives portrayed, when in fact the evidence just showed that certain things took place or certain things were described. The moral judgments were just conjecture, and often conjecture from the basis of what we believe and think in the 21st century. And this is what is one version of top-heavy analysis. Arguments that treat texts as artifacts of cultures are, for the purposes of our Hume core classes, also examples of top-heavy arguing. We simply don't have the evidence assigned in text in our syllabus to argue whether or not particular writers or arguments are or are not representative of the societies or cultures from which they come. So in our classes, claims about, for example, gender politics in the ancient world will be treated as top-heavy. We just can't look at evidence to support these arguments, not in these classes as they are designed by the syllabus. Both bottom-heavy and top-heavy arguments can result from writing the intro first. Very often you know what the paper is about, so you just write that in your intro and go from there. But an intro doesn't just tell us what a paper is about, it tells us precisely the case you're going to make and how you're going to make it. Otherwise, it's just a vague top-heavy argument. A bottom-heavy argument that can result from starting with the intro or the rhetoric is one in which you can't really find evidence to support the point you thought you could make. So you just quote mine and come up with evidence that's just broadly representative of the text in general and doesn't clearly support the particular case you're making. So it just sticks out on the bottom, metaphorically speaking. It's not built upon. The next issue is the alignment of the paper, or its internal consistency. A well-aligned argument is built up with a clear plan, and no part of the argument is out of position to support the other parts of the argument. Examples of a misaligned argument are ones that drift, where the conclusions wind up in a different place from the introductions. A kind of misaligned argument that's very common is an argument where the intro doesn't match the conclusion. Often, the conclusion is much more specific and more representative of the argument as a whole than the introduction, because the author wrote the conclusion after they wrote the whole paper. So naturally, after you're done with something, you're in a much better position to say what it is that you've in fact done. Another common case of misalignment is one where evidence, analysis, or claims stick out in a direction that others do not. This is also what can happen if you write your intro first, or if you do what many of us do, which is to make claims in your body paragraphs and search for the evidence later. This is, I would suggest, not a way to build a structure that all lines up. Very often, the evidence we find points in another direction, and to the reader, this alignment of the argument will look off. So, what can we do to make sure our arguments are proportional and that they're aligned? Here are some exercises I suggest you do when you're done with writing your papers. When you're done, I recommend creating a new blank document in your word processor and using it to do these exercises. I suggest the following. Read the intro after the conclusion and vice versa. Are they aligned? How could you fix them? Put all your topic sentences together. Does this sound like your main claim when you read them together? How could you fix that? Look at your main claim and at one body paragraph. Does all the evidence in the body paragraph support the topic sentence, and the topic sentence of the paragraph support the main claim? If not, how could you fix them? For our meeting on Zoom, we'll be doing just one of these exercises. that you'll choose for us.